Hello all, and welcome back to another episode of TV and Us, a conversation show about the TV series we just can't stop talking about. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And each season we focus on a different show, reviewing it episode by episode, and we invite you to watch along with us. Right now, we are reviewing Severance Season 1, and today we're on episode 4, titled The You Are. Okay, if you haven't watched this episode yet, this is your spoiler alert. Please check it out before continuing to listen to the rest of this conversation. Okay, Sarah, kick us off with an episode summary for episode 4.
Irving finds an intriguing book at work. Helly aggressively pursues a meeting with her outie. Mark attends a funeral with Mrs. Selvig.
All right. Perfectly vague about the funeral. That's smart of a summary to do.
Yeah, and I appreciate the aggressively pursues a meeting, describing what Helly does. Like, you're not wrong.
And we are rooting for her, but much to discuss with her arc as well in this episode. Okay, well, let's start off with our episode titles for episode 4. Sarah, what is yours?
Mine is Destiny.
Nice. Nice. And each character is figuring out what that means for themselves in their own special ways.
Yes.
My episode title is It's Raining Contraband.
Yes, it is. Wow. Yeah, you're not wrong. There's so much contraband in this episode.
Yep, which makes for a fun time to see how the characters respond to it. Okay, let's dive in. We are on episode 4. We are near the halfway point of the show. I suppose midway through the next episode will be the perfect halfway point. But Sarah, tell me your thoughts on how this journey is continuing to progress. Are we feeling more engaged, more satisfied with where this is going, or more questions, more frustration? Where are you on the spectrum?
Yeah, I think that this is the strongest episode so far. While I still don't really know where the show is going, there's not like a central journey or mission that our heroes are on. This episode felt like the first time for me that there was some sense of forward momentum. And we see not just Mark taking steps, but we see, Helly is continuing to try and escape with no success, but we learn more about the world through that. But then we also see both Irv and Dylan starting to rebel in their own ways as well. And so I really appreciated that all 4 of them, in their own specific ways, are seeing the issues with this corporation and are taking steps in response to that. Like Irv is befriending Bert and he wants to learn more about that. And so he is spending time away from his desk and his function to pursue this thing that he's actually really enjoying more. And Dylan finding the book and reading the book. And then we know about Helly and Mark. So I liked that by the end, all 4 of them are engaging in some subtle or not so subtle rebellion. And I feel like that is the start of that kind of momentum that I was looking for. So I'm very curious how the next episode is going to maybe continue that and continue to unearth some things, and then, seeing how our characters will react to some of that new knowledge that they're going to gain as they go deeper into what is this company really doing, and actually asking those questions instead of just making up an answer so that they continue to do their work.
I had a feeling you'd be a little bit more pleased with this episode because things are actually happening. And we see characters make very distinct decisions that move the plot forward or change their worldview or their circumstances in a meaningful way. So we do get a lot more of that in this episode, which is really, really neat. one of the things that I thought was really interesting about this episode is the role of art and how those mediums that we need and consume as humans are the things that are starting to ignite these characters to rebel and to want more. So the presence of the art and Bert and Irv kind of connecting over that, and that being a draw and a something that they long for, that they are now doing together and potentially rebelling by doing that together, because Irv is not spending his time doing his job now. He is connecting with this other human being over an art form and being just so like drawn to that. And then the presence of the book and just like the communication of ideas through the written form is starting to ignite Dylan in an interesting way, him reading the acrostic poem, and then also igniting new ideas in Mark. So him reading that passage around the work needs you, you don't need the work, and the way that that is shifting his perspective and now maybe inspiring him to think about his position here as and his inner self stuck in this place, and just the way that the written form as an art form is igniting him to even be inspired enough to rebel and to consider something different is really interesting to me. So I thought that that was really fascinating to see, is that all of these characters are responding in some way to a form of art that is so imperative for human beings, and the way that that is changing and shifting their perspectives and therefore their decision making was really fun to see.
Yes, art is so important and it's so easy to like forget that and overlook that, but it's absolutely vital. And I think it's interesting that both Irving and Dylan have these kind of creative sides to them, and they're really drawn to, like, Irv is drawn to the art on the walls, and Dylan has such a creative mind and in how he processes through things, and even what he's reading in the book is that poem. He doesn't start by reading like a
Mm.
chapter of text like Mark did. We see him reading a poem. So I'm so curious about their outside selves and what they are passionate about outside, because in a previous episode, Petey talks about how like the emotions kind of bleed over from
Mhm.
outside self to inside self, and I really think that there's probably more to it than just emotions. And so I'm very curious to see some of these creative sides or some of these things that these characters are drawn to inside, how that relates to their lives outside, because there's probably a connection there that we just don't know yet because we haven't seen their outside selves. But that's something that I'm very curious about, especially after this episode.
Yeah. And so far, the show has only really shown us Mark's outside self, outer self. And we haven't met the other characters in their outie forms. I guess we met briefly Helly's outside self I think it's like in episode one or two. I believe it's
Hmm.
in episode one where Mark almost
Yeah.
runs into her in the parking lot. But other than that, we haven't seen any of these other people outside of the context of their corporate selves. So I think that is interesting to see if where the show will take us from that perspective.
I want to know because Dylan and Irving are so interesting, and so is Helly. Like, they're all
Yeah.
such fascinating people. I'm like, why can't I learn about their outside lives? Why do I only have to learn about Mark's outside life? He's so boring and dull. Like, show me the exciting people.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because if they are so dynamic in their inner selves, you can only imagine that when they have the presence of uh community and people and music and art and just like connection and stimulation that is allowed for in the outside world, how much more dynamic their characters are going to be. Because I think that's one thing that's so clear in this episode is how much they are stripped of any kind of stimulation, whether it's artistic or even just ideological. They are not allowed to read anything else other than the handbook. And so the versions of themselves in this corporate space are truly like an incredibly stripped down version, because they have no other inputs that can shape them and make them full and colorful and dynamic. They are only made up of the things that are allowed for them, which seems to be very, very narrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And they're still so interesting. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
that's what's wild. So that is just feeding into more of my wanting to know things that this show might not be interested in showing me, which would be rude, but it's fine.
Yeah, we shall see. We shall see. One outie that we meet in some way through video form is Helly's outie, outer self. And there's a really fascinating scene where obviously Helly is continuing to aggressively pursue freedom. But Helly's outie records a video back to herself, and she says, "I am a person you are not. I make the decisions, you do not." And I'm curious your thoughts on that whole sequence, because it feels so, the dynamics of the outer selves to the inner selves aren't really clear to us for most of the show up until now. But there's such a clear and menacing way that that's communicated that I'm curious to hear your thoughts about.
Yeah, that's a really powerful moment, because we've been thinking probably similar to inside Helly, that if outside Helly understood what was going on and understood that inside Helly was not having a good time, she wanted out, like this is her own personal hell that she would like to escape from, that outside Helly would be like, oh, yeah, self, okay, let's go. And that's not what happens. So it just, I think, adds another layer of intrigue about why Helly decided to do this. We know Mark's reason for being there, and it's like avoidance of grief, basically, and just a way for him to endure the hell that he's walking through outside of work. And so I think for me, it just adds to more questions about who outside Helly is and what she is doing, and her I guess like almost hatred of her inside self. And I think that that's really a fascinating thing, and I think it adds an interesting layer given the protesters and all of that advocating against Lumen. I think that that's just another interesting aspect of this larger premise of the show.
Yeah, and it also begs some interesting questions around, like, one, what narrative has Lumen told Helly's outer self to control and kind of inspire that menacing response? We got to see in one of the earlier episodes that when Marks gets hit in the head with a stapler, I think this was episode 1, Lumen tells Mark's outer self that it's a different narrative, like, oh, you were holding things, and I think it was like a projector or something like that, and you fell, and that's what happened. And so Lumen controls the story in a lot of ways, and we because their brains are severed, Lumen can tell Helly's outer self anything that they want to in order to ensure that the system of control is still in place. So it's really fascinating to think about, like, one, did Helly's outer self even watch that video or not? And then two, how has Lumen shaped or brainwashed Helly's outer self in order to inspire that specific perspective? Because you would think, like you mentioned, that Helly's outer self would also be just as concerned for the well-being and the happiness and the safety of her inner self, but that dynamic doesn't seem to be clear to her. And in fact, the dynamic seems to be, as the outer self, I have the upper hand, and you are not expected to have a soul and a point of view on any of this. And so that power dynamic between the outer self and the inner self is also really interesting, that is communicated through that one video.
And I think because this whole show is kind of this interesting like spin on compartmentalization, and like it's so easy to compartmentalize and try and avoid feelings or avoid whatever we're trying to avoid by boxing it off. And I think that this is a really visceral representation of that concept and the ways that you can, basically be like, nope, that doesn't matter. I'm going to ignore, those emotional cues that my mind is giving me, or I'm going to ignore, this pain that I'm feeling in my body because it's not convenient. Like just the way that we isolate parts of ourselves and then ignore those parts when they're inconvenient. And I just think that that's a really interesting way to show like a more extreme version of what we probably do all the time.
That's a really great point. Yeah. And kind of the lengths that we will go to ensure that the compartments are separate, and just how intense that can be. And the lack of willingness to even acknowledge that there may be real needs, real emotional needs, well-being needs that are just entirely ignored by the different parts of ourselves is like a really, really interesting way that that's communicated. Yeah, I love the phrase that you use, but this being like a incredibly visceral way of showcasing the compartmentalization that we do. That's a very long word.
It's a very long word, and it's a hard word to say.
Yeah, many letters. So many letters, so many syllables. My brain is not computing.
And that's okay. You won't get points deducted from that. That is not an unwritten rule of this podcast universe.
Oh, I don't need a wellness check, perhaps.
Nah, dude, you're good. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep finding the scary numbers. We need you.
Oh, yeah. Scary words, I think we discussed in a previous episode. Outie being an innie being scary words for you. Compartmentalization is a scary word for me.
That's fair. Yours is much more logical than mine. So you are correct, as per usual.
I always crack up when they reference they call them outies, because we never get to hear the inverse of it. I need the outer versions of these people to reference their inside selves so we can know, are they calling them innies or not? What is the formal word?
But probably based on Helly's reaction, the outside self probably doesn't think about their inside self very much. Like they're probably just, I don't know, I guess like disassociating to some degree. And just, again, it's that compartmentalization of like, you're just over here, you don't exist. And then like, because of your labor, I can go and live my life and enjoy my life, and I don't have to think about you. So they probably just don't even think about it until probably somebody brings up working at Lumon, and then they feel some type of way about it.
Yeah. And it's interesting that like the outer selves are the ones that have the control and also perceive themselves to also have the control. And the way that is aligned too is really interesting. We see Helly make a pretty big choice by the end of this episode. Again, this episode ends on a cliffhanger, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that part of her arc that seems to continue to develop and get more and more intense.
Yeah, I think, just that desperation that she's feeling. And, it does make me think about how, so like I have a tendency to ignore when my body is like in pain, or I'll be so focused on working on something that I won't eat, and then I'll have a headache. Like I'll do like these little things where I get so caught up in what I'm doing that I like ignore part of myself. And there comes a point where you can no longer ignore yourself. And I feel like, again, Helly is such an extreme example of that, where she's going to do whatever she has to do to get out of this, with or without her outside self's help. And so I'm curious how this is going to go, because I mean, we presumably will see more of Helly after this. So like I'm very curious what this actually means and how this will go. And I really am still thinking that Lumen is maybe doing some like shady stuff in people's brains somehow, because if you can like sever two halves of somebody's brain, like I don't know, you could probably do other stuff too. So I wonder if Helly's choices will reveal maybe more of Lumen's shadiness that's going on that we might not yet be aware of.
Yeah, yeah. And how Lumen needs to figure out how to ensure that she gets in line, because this is highly inconvenient for them if one of their employees is continuing to try and break out of the prison that they feel that they've been put in, and continues to try to escape. And presumably, like, Lumen has all of the systems of surveillance to watch her actions. And
Yeah.
so even their willingness to allow so much already is like fascinating to think about. I would assume that they could have stopped her much earlier. And I'm sure there's cameras everywhere that someone's always watching. And she's clearly a flight risk. So you'd think that they would constantly be watching her. So even the allowance of so much is interesting to ponder as well. Like, why let her get so far with her plan when she clearly is going to do this action? And I would assume that they would have seen that already. So I had a lot of questions about, like, one, are they watching and allowing it? Or two, do they not have the systems of surveillance? And this is a problem that they're going to have to figure out how to deal with now. So that was also another factor that, like, didn't seem to make sense to me, but there's got to be a reason behind it. So that was interesting to ponder.
And I think my other question is, what does the application process look like for this role? Like, because Helly immediately did not want to be here, and she has not acclimated after however long it's been. And so, like any job, I would presume, go through an interview process for Lumen, especially if they're doing brain surgery on you. Like, you would think that they would be very selective in the type of people that they allow into this really particular secretive role. And Helly doesn't seem to be the type of person, from what we've seen, that you would want in that role. She is going to be a natural disruptor, whereas somebody like Mark isn't. He's just going to status quo it up, and that's going to be great. Irv fully bought into the Kool-Aid. He is with you, not going to rock the boat. Dylan, he's a creative thinker, but I don't think that he will be the instigator to start something. But Helly has the personality to be a catalyst and to really mess some things up. So why did they allow her into this role in the first place? So I have questions about Lumen's hiring practices is also where I'm at after this episode, because it doesn't seem to make sense unless you want her to shake things up, which seems to be antithetical to the shady corporation continuing to exist. So I just have questions about their hiring. What did that look like? Why did you hire Helly? Because both inside Helly and outside Helly seem to be not a good fit for this.
Yeah. You'd almost want to hire the really kind of lukewarm personality types. And it seems like outside Helly is incredibly passionate in the direction of supporting the system and supporting the mission of Lumen. And so that is fascinating to think about as well. Is like you want the Marks of the world that are just going to get in line and don't have these passionate ideas in any direction. But someone like Helly could either be passionately in favor and supportive of the company or passionately against it. But the passion is there, and when it's directed in uh, a direction that's different from the goals of your company, then that becomes problematic. When it's directed in the direction of what your company is trying to do, it's great for you too. So we see outside Helly really aligned to likely the systems of control that Lumon are advocating for and putting in place. And so she is a staunch supporter of it.
Yeah. So that's just an interesting thing to keep an eye out for, is how is that uh passion going to affect, because like passion is infectious. And so I'm just surprised that they would want somebody that passionate, even if it's passionate in a direction that serves them, to be in this role. I don't know, it's just
Mm-hmm.
interesting. We'll see.
Mm-hmm.
Things are going to continue to snowball, and Helly seems to be quite a strong catalyst for that forward momentum that I've been looking for.
Yes, yes, we do get a lot of that, a lot of momentum in this episode. Okay, other big things that we wanted to make sure we mention and discuss.
Oh, I guess we have to talk about the funeral, don't we?
We
That is a
do.
thing that happened.
Yes, a lot happens at the funeral as well. Well, one, we get to meet PD's family members and some of the thoughts that they have about the severance procedure. So I thought it was very interesting that his daughter, June, makes a comment to Mark, which is very similar to a comment that was made to him at a friend gathering that he was at in earlier episodes around, like, why did you think that turning your brain off for 8 hours a day would help you deal with your difficult emotions? So again, seeing other perspectives in this world about the severance procedure is really interesting. But then, two, we see that Harmony slash Mrs. Selvig make some big choices and big decisions at the funeral as well, of retrieving Petey's chip. And so I'm curious your thoughts on that component of this sequence.
Yeah, we're just casually drilling into people's brains in the middle of a funeral, which, you know, that's cool. Uh I had so many questions about that. Like, I get that everybody is in the other room, they're watching a video, they're, emotional and focused on remembering Petey. But I don't know. Drilling into somebody's skull is going to make some noise. Like, how did nobody hear that? How did nobody, I don't know, respond to what was going on? Was everybody really in that one room and nobody was loitering outside to see what she was doing? Like, I don't know. That was just so weird to me. It's like, this feels improbable, but okay, it's fine. She retrieved the chip. She did what she needed to do. Uh cool. Good for you, Mrs. Selvig. That's great.
Mm-hmm. Well, also the fact that, like, I would assume that the chip is in a very specific, like, location, so she's also, like, skilled enough to be able to, like, drill in and find it. I was thinking about, like, the physical placement and logistics of having to get this very tiny chip out of someone's skull, and to be able to do that so quickly. Like, she clearly knew where it was and the exact angle to drill in to get it, which is interesting as well.
Yeah, that was one of those scenes where I'm like, okay, that's fine. We're doing this. This doesn't make sense to me, but okay.
Mm-hmm.
Live your life. Get your chip. That's cool.
Yep.
Maybe she moonlights as a brain surgeon. I don't know. We don't know.
It
She
could be
seems to be
useful
all
for
over
her.
the place. So why
Yeah.
not have a hobby of drilling into people's brains? That
Well,
seems
the most
nice.
interesting part, the most interesting part about that scene is that we learn that she is operating with her own convictions outside of what the board wants, or what the board maybe is expecting of her. So the fact that she's taking matters into her own hands and kind of has her own agenda is interesting. It's more fun, I think, because she's not just, enforcing the things that the board is looking for and kind of a player in the system. Like she's kind of a third floating agent of chaos in the storyline, which I think will be really fun to see how that plays out as well, because she's doing her own thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do find that interesting that there is kind of this rebellious streak to her as well. And that's kind of what we saw initially from Mark and Irving and Dylan, not Helly. She's been outright rebellious from the beginning. But the other three, it'd be these like really little signs of rebellion. So it's like, I'm going to do what you want me to do, but like slightly differently, or I'm going to take this action without permission. And it's these like bending of the rules. And you see her doing that as well. So I think she's another interesting opportunity for chaos if the show wants to go in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. No, that's very true, and we will see now all of their rebellions and their intersecting plots affect each other, as well as they each make choices that are in the direction that they are looking for, and it is no longer serving the company anymore. And so all of them are going to collide in some fun ways.
Mm-hmm. We love to see it. We love to
Yep.
see interesting collisions of people.
Yep. 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 Another point of rebellion is that we see more of Bert in this episode, and we see the beginnings of a budding relationship or a romance between Irv and Bert. So I'm curious your thoughts about that storyline.
Honestly, I'm here for it. Let's go. I really do love Bert and Irving, and it makes me think of Bert and Ernie. And I just am enjoying the idea of them just hanging out all the time, being best pals. That's just great. You know, if there's a little romance there, live your lives, man. You guys are just having fun. Bond over some art, have a great time. Uh, it really is interesting, though, that the episode kind of ends on Irving going back down there to hang out with Bert, and he discovers some secrets, and there's some other stuff going on in O&D. So I'm very curious how Irving is going to respond to that. Is he going to confront Bert? Is he going to tell Mark because it needs to go up the proper chain of command? Is he going to tell somebody else and throw us kind of a curveball in that regard? So I think it's fascinating that Irv has learned this secret, and it's going to be even more interesting to see what he does with that information, because the handbook would tell him to go up the chain of command, but Irv is starting to think a little bit outside of the box. So how he
Mm-hmm.
responds, I think, is going to tell us a lot about him and kind of where he is mentally in all of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I think that's been something fun to see for each of the characters too, is when there's something that is they know to be not right, or not following the rules, what do they do with it? Like even seeing Mark secretly reading the book from Rick in the bathroom. Like he's not turned that in. Dylan also reading the book, even though they know it's wrong. And so Irving's particularly interesting because he is the biggest rule follower out of all of them. And so his rebellion will be even more significant because we know that it is so not in his nature to. So if this new romance, this new discovery, these new questions that he's finally starting to uproot, that obedience to the system, I think will be interesting to see if he chooses that or not. We'll find out.
Yes, Irv, rebel,
Mm-hmm.
stick it to the man, like fight the larger corporation. You can do it, buddy. We believe in
Yeah.
you.
Yep. We shall see. All right. Any other big things that we wanted to discuss before we give out some awards?
Oh, another detail that I just loved, it tickled me so much, is early in the episode when Bert comes to their office. Dylan's first response is to pull out his stapler and point it at Bert like a gun. And I loved that. I love that Dylan is so anti O&D, and it's so funny to me. So I want to see more uh, Dylan and Bert, or Dylan and O&D moments, because he is bringing his A game, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I loved that little moment. It also is just so fun and silly and ridiculous. There's a really great wide shot of that too, where you just see him from like 20 feet away, full stance, ready to go with this with the stapler. With a stapler.
Hmm. He's ready. He is armed, ready. If there is an intrusion, he's got your back.
Yeah, but like what is he gonna do with a stapler? Oh, it's so good.
It's amazing.
Okay, let's give out some awards. The first category is Employee of the Week. Who is getting this award for this week?
I would like to give this award to Grainer, because he shows empathy and he attempts to comfort Harmony. And I thought that that was
Mm.
just a really tender moment from this dude who is kind of a villain. So I want to reward him showing a positive human emotion.
Who would have ever thought that Grainer would receive this award? But
Not
great
me.
choice. Great choice.
Here we are,
And
though.
Harmony just like throws it back in his face too.
Right?
So funny.
So good.
Yeah. I am actually giving this award to Dylan for the stapler moment because he is creatively using company assets to for his needs and thinking outside of the box for how he would like to use the
Mm,
things that
mhm.
he's been given. So that
Yeah.
was my choice.
Yeah. It's so fun. We love the
Mhm.
creativity.
Yeah, that's so great. The second category is move the needle moment. What's your choice for this one?
Yeah, I think Irv discovering the book and showing it to Mark.
It's visually so great because that book is so bright
Yes.
orange and
Yeah.
everything else in this world is so cool toned and blue that it's like
Mhm.
leaping off a screen. Like I am tempted to reach to my screen and grab it as well. So I think that visually, set design, production design, all of that, prop design, really well done. Okay, I am giving this award to the moment when Harmony chooses to take the chip out of Petey's head at the funeral. I think that we have always wondered, like what is Harmony's role in this corporation, but seeing that she is acting outside of the bounds that she is supposed to be in is, I think, a really fun shift for the show and uh, the plot that will continue to unfold. So the fact that she is not obedient and she has got her own agenda is, I think, going to be really fun.
Yeah. And just some light brain surgery at a funeral. Like, who
Yeah.
doesn't love that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Casual. No big deal, guys. No big deal. I just brought my drill with me. I'm gonna drill into this dude's skull. Don't mind me. Carry
Yeah.
on your grief.
Yep. The next category is achievement in corporate teas, a special dialect that is speaking in a corporate setting. Sarah, what is your choice for this award?
Okay, I love on Petey's map, he has written at the bottom, for research only, not to scale. And I really love that he included that on his little doodle drawing of the corporation.
Mm. That's so good. I didn't even notice that. That's funny. My choice for this award is Mark. Mark has a lot of candidates for
He
submission for
does.
this award.
Yep.
But the one that particularly stood out to me is when he says to Helly, we deal with the uncertainty work brings us together as a family. And I just think that, like, that narrative of being family at work is so prominent, uh, so odd, but so prominent. And this feeling of togetherness and connection and relationship, even when they aren't there, is that it's just so toxic. And we see that a lot in corporate spaces. And I love that he says that to her as well. And she like rolls her eyes in his face because it makes no sense. We don't need, that's a very strong claim, and we don't need to be making those.
Right? It's such a good choice. And I love Helly's response. Uh
Yeah.
where she just says, I could not, with a razor to my throat, be interested in being part of your family. I just, I love how upset she gets and then how violent her language is in response to his proffering of family. Oh, it's just so good.
Mm-hmm.
I love that he continues to like put the handbook to her and like bring it to her so like gently and kindly. And she's like, bah, I don't want that. Get that out of here. It's
Mm-hmm.
just great.
Yeah, we're seeing Mark do the whole manager thing and spew all of the lines needed to get her in
Mhm.
place, and she's not having any of it. It's
Yeah,
great.
it's not working.
All right, looking ahead, what are you excited to see next?
Okay, so some kind of silly questions that I have is on PD's map, he has drawn a coil of doom, and I really want to know what the coil of doom is.
Mm.
Uh, and then I would also like to know, is OND plotting a coup? Because I'm here for that, and I would like to join. So, like, what are we doing? If we're doing a coup, that sounds great. Let's go. Um, and then we already talked about another thing that I am curious about is when, or I guess, will we meet their outside selves? If so, when? Who are they? We already talked about it, but they're so interesting inside of Lumen. And I want to know what they are like outside of Lumen
Mm.
because they seem to be rather dynamic and interesting. So I would like to spend more time with the others' outside selves.
Yep, yep. And if we get to see who they are and then how that informs our understanding of their inside selves and predicting and guessing what choices they might make based on how they're wired on the outside, I think will be fun to see if that unfolds. I am excited to see the world continue to expand, and as we learn more about Lumen, what are all of the things that we will discover. So that room that Irv peeked into, like, what's going on in there? So interesting. And what will he do with that information? And there's just so many wings and parts of this corporation that we clearly know exist based on PD's map. And so being able to uncover more about what is going on, I think, is going to be exciting to see. And then how does the characters' choices continue to shape some of the things that they will decide to do, whether they rebel or don't rebel. We see the inklings of it. We see Mark secretly holding onto the map, but then he destroys it. And we see him secretly reading the book. And then what will happen from there? Because clearly there's some shifts happening in their perspectives and their worldviews. So the world is beginning to open up even more in this place.
Yes, yes. There is more to life than just Lumen. There are more books that exist in the world than just the handbook. We'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, we will find out. And we will be here for the rest of this journey. So this is our review and discussion of episode 4. You can find it available to stream on Apple TV+. Thank you for listening to today's episode of TV and Us. Our name sums it up. We're big fans of TV and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. So everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today as we continued our journey through Severance Season 1. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review letting us know your thoughts about episode 4. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at tvnspod, or you can email us at tvnspod@gmail.com. We will be back to discuss episode 5, in which case we will be squarely past the halfway point of the show, and we're here to see what will unfold next. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again very soon.